Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to your planet, my planet, but certainly not Lori Lightfoot's planet. Planet Hog. Mostly my planet, though. Yeah, man. I I hope you all have been keeping abreast of the goings on as votes continue to materialize for President Trump in Georgia. They keep finding these damn flashcards, these flashcards. They keep finding these damn flash drives, these little memory cards that just happen to have thousands of votes for Donald Trump that somehow got overlooked. It is amazing. It's not really amazing to me anymore. I don't know. I saw one article refer to it as election fatigue, but it's the fact that both sides, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing here because you do have people that voted for Joe Biden that says, there needs to be a full, not just a recount, but they need to start qualifying some of these votes. And I don't know, the fact that that hasn't happened yet is really astounding to me. But I don't know. I think we are moving towards, man. So when I was riding into work today, I was actually listening to a bunch of stuff actually, but I threw some Motorhead, and all that stuff that they're singing about back in those days. A lot of the bands were talking about people kind of infringing on rights and corporations and this and that. We're actually living that shit now. Like if you listen to a lot of those songs, there's a lot of relevance to what's going on right now. Like back in the day, not so much, right? You're just kind of like, okay, they're singing about fighting the fight, and it was just some kind of fanciful idea. But we're living that shit now. We are living that shit now. And I was reading up. I saw this article about what was going on in Michigan and how President Trump almost won Michigan, but the Republicans up there kind of folded because the Democrats did what they do, and I'm talking about the people who are actually certifying the votes up there. I think there was 2-2, and basically they just got punked into doing it because the two Democrat dudes threw a fit and called them racist, and then the one actually doxed the lady, which was, it's what they do. There's nothing they do anymore that I'm just like, wow, that's kind of low for you. That's kind of base. There is no base. They just kind of go lower and lower and lower. So, but I was disappointed that they kind of gave in to him. And I understand, people are afraid and their families or whatever, but you can't keep giving in. And maybe that's a selfish point of view. Maybe that's a point of view that's strictly from my perspective, but I'm just looking at this thing logically now. Like I said previously, there's apologies mean nothing anymore. It's just about domination at this point. It's about intimidation at this point, and the more you give in, the more it'll continue, and the worse it'll continue. For example, let's talk about masks very briefly because I got to get into social media. I said we talk about social media today, so I'll do that. But let's talk about the masks. And first, it was I'll try to separate it from the shutdowns, but it kind of goes hand in hand. But first masks, nope, they're not going to do anything. Don't do it. Then it was everybody wear it. Now all these places are mandating that you wear it. But did it stop there? No, because you've had governors who have been brazen enough to say, no Thanksgiving for you. Now, all of those same governors go out and do whatever they want, and then they give you some bullshit excuse, and most of you eat it up. But I don't know, man. And you think it would stop at Thanksgiving? Nope, they've already said no Christmas. And then I saw an article where the Pennsylvania governor said is now mandating that you have to wear masks in your house. So we're if you cannot see the accretion of all of these mandates and how it's not going to stop, again, when you give in to someone, it is only natural for them to continue to assert themselves and try to take more and take more and take more until you stop giving. Until you stand on your square, you draw a line and you say, this is where it stops. But, on the one hand, it's easy for people down here to kind of dismiss that, like, well, that's Pennsylvania, or, well, that's New Jersey, well, that's New York, well, that's California. But we are interconnected, at least for the time being, as the United States. So it's kind of, I think it's short-sighted to not give a shit about what's going on up there. Anyhow, man, I was, so anyway, I was keeping up with what was going on in Michigan, because actually, if they didn't certify the votes from that one county, I forget the name of the county, it's basically the one where Detroit, it plays the leading role, then President Trump would have won Michigan. But since they caved in, but so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, this thing is fishy to anybody who's looking at it through any semblance of an objective lens. But I don't know, I'm going to float a theory out there that I'm working on right now. Because if you notice, these areas that were the most, where the process kind of stalled to the point where nobody really knows what's going on right now. It's just this perpetual ambiguity of how many votes. So we're finding votes. So, we don't know what we're doing. And the Trump legal teams are pretty much attacking these jurisdictions. But if you notice, obviously they're all in battleground states, right? Talking about Michigan, talking about Wisconsin, talking about Georgia, talking about, what was the other one? Pennsylvania, duh. So they're all obviously in battleground states, but they're also in cities. And cities, I just did a little light research, right? Because the thing about the Democrats is they're really not smooth with their shenanigans. Like they really aren't, there's no guile to their hustle. It's all out in front. It's all open. They're not smooth at all. And, I was telling a friend of mine, they're pretty much, for those of you who used to watch the Looney Tunes back in the day, a lot of their tactics remind me of Wile E. Coyote, because he's always like setting up these elaborate traps, but the only person he ends up trapping is himself. And it's just that seems to be them, because no matter what they do, it always seems to backfire on them the most, right? So I'm looking at this rant, and it's gone, viral. This Zoom rant where these guys pretty much pressured this lady and the other guy into pushing along the votes, into certifying the votes in Michigan, which is a quick side. A lot of my beliefs align with Republicans. I'll just never join that party because I just see Republicans as weak. I see Republicans as cowards. And, I'm not alone, obviously, because the reason why people bow up on them like that is because they know they'll back down. And, you get a lot of these Facebook tough talking patriot types, and patriot in air quotes, right? That, they wear their Line 9 apparel, and they got their little grunt style t-shirts, but they're really not about shit. And I just can't respect that. And, save a handful of Republicans in the Senate. The rest of them are pretty much useless. And in a lot of ways, just as bad, if not worse, than their Democratic counterparts. But anyway, back to this theory of mine. So I'm watching this guy just rant on this woman and says, "Oh, you're trying to disenfranchise voters, and this is a black county, and this, and that, and all these black votes that you're going to disenfranchise." Of course, it's a white dude, white liberal, right? So I'm thinking, is that the move? So then I started looking up all these other places where it's going on, all these other counties. And the one in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, pretty much holds the water. The one in Georgia, Atlanta, pretty much holds the water. The one in Pennsylvania, Philly, pretty much holds the water. In all these counties that we're having issues with, in all these counties where poll watchers were not allowed in all these counties where Trump has his legal proceedings going. And I said, okay, well, let me do some quick demographic research. And each one of these cities, Detroit for Wisconsin, Detroit for Michigan, Milwaukee for Wisconsin, Atlanta for Georgia, Philly for PA, these are all cities that have the highest black population of those respective states. So I'm like, okay, maybe we're onto something here, because that's the move, right? If I'm the Democrats, what's the play? Well, if we're going to do some shady shit, no, scratch that. We're going to do some shady shit. So let's do it in the majority black city so that when Republicans try to fight it and Donald Trump tries to fight it, we can say what? That you're trying to disenfranchise black voters, that you're a racist. So, I don't know, man. I think that's a pretty solid theory. Because on the other end, if they get busted, right? If they get busted, and when they get busted, hopefully, they can just kind of be like, oh, well, those people didn't really do it. They could do what white liberals do and just kind of, oh, those silly Negroes, they didn't know what they're doing. They can't read. So I don't know. It's a theory. It's a theory, man, that they're just trying to float it in there because, again, if you fight against it, then you're a racist. You're trying to disenfranchise voters. But anyway, I didn't come here to talk to you about that. Today, we're going to talk about the social media proceedings that are going on in the Senate. A story that I don't think is getting a lot of leeway or a lot of coverage, but very important. So we'll listen to a couple of clips today, and we'll just kind of ride through them. Two of them. I mean, the actual proceedings it was like a 4-hour block of time. I'm not really going to go through all of that, as most of you know. I like to keep it to about a half hour if I can. But so I got two clips here in particular. One with Senator Ted Cruz, the hardest working Republican in the Senate. I mean, it seems like everything that gets done on the Republican side that Donald Trump isn't doing, Ted Cruz is somehow involved with or leading it. Excuse me. And then another with, I can't think of the guy's name, but he's from Missouri. Anyway. And in this, they'll be talking to Jack Dorsey of Twitter and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. So, yeah, like I said, we'll just fire through a couple of these and, we'll do kind of like I did yesterday, and I'll stop and pause it when I have something to add. But we'll try to let it run through relatively uninterrupted. So, without further ado, we'll start with Senator Cruz's exchange with Jack Dorsey.
Speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of a free press. And yet there's an absolute silence from Democrats speaking up for the press outlets censored by big tech. There's an absolute silence for Democrats speaking out for the citizens silenced by big tech. Instead, there is a demand, use even more power to silence dissent, and that's a totalitarian instinct that I think is very dangerous. At the same time that big tech exercises massive power, it also enjoys massive corporate welfare through the effect of Section 230, a special immunity from liability that nobody else gets. Congress has given big tech, in effect, a subsidy while they become some of the wealthiest corporations on the face of the planet.
I thought that was a nice move. It was kind of a jab that Ted Cruz threw. I thought to say he's talking to Jack Dorsey now, right? And to say that you're enjoying welfare. I would imagine, right, that if I'm a billionaire, the last thing I want to be accused of is being on welfare. I thought that was a nice little jab that he threw there, but you know, so the issue here, for those who are not aware, is Section 230 basically absolves, and he'll get into it more as I let it play, but it basically absolves them of any responsibilities for the things that are said on their platforms, because they're saying, well, we're not actually publishers. We just give people a platform. We're not responsible for what they do with it. The point being contested is, well, no, if you are actively censoring people, and namely people from one specific political affiliation, then you have taken on the role of a publisher, and therefore you're responsible for everything else. Since you want to do it, then okay, you're responsible for it. So that's the point being contended here. But we will continue on.
Mr. Dorsey, I want to focus primarily on Twitter and ask you initially, is Twitter a publisher?
Is Twitter a publisher?
Yes.
No, we are not. We distribute information.
So what is a publisher?
An entity that is publishing under editorial guidelines and decisions.
Well, your answer happens to be contrary to the text of federal statute, particular Section 230, which defines an information content provider as any person or entity that is responsible in whole or in part for the creation or development of information provided through the internet or any other interactive computer service. Let me ask you, was Twitter being a publisher when it censored the New York Post?
No, we have very clear policies on the conduct we enable on the platform. And if there's a violation, we take an enforcement action, and people choose to commit to those policies and to those terms of service.
Except your policies are applied in a partisan and selective manner. You claim it was hacked materials, and yet you didn't block the distribution of the New York Times story that alleged to talk about President Trump's tax returns, even though a federal statute makes it a crime to distribute someone's tax returns without their consent. You didn't block any of that discussion, did you?
Our policy was focused on distribution of the actual hacked materials.
One thing I want you to notice that I noticed is with both of these guys, how they dodge answers. They'll be asked a lot of yes/no questions and kind of start trying to talk their way around an answer, a definitive yes or no answer, which in my experience, again, if the answer is clearly yes, then you say yes. If the answer is clearly no, then you say no. But if you are trying to deceive or avoid speaking the truth, then you start to obfuscate the question and try to avoid the actual answer that's being asked for. So, without further ado.
Did you block the discussion of the president's tax return material?
And in the New York Times case, we interpret it as reporting about the hacked materials.
Did you block Edward Snowden when he illegally released material?
I don't have the answer for that.
The answer is no. You haven't used this in a selective manner. Let me ask you, were you being a publisher when you forced Politico, another journalistic outlet, to take down their tweets on a topic that you had deemed impermissible?
No. We were enforcing our policy and our terms of service.
So on October 15th, Jake Sherman, a reporter at Politico, tweeted the following. I tweeted a link to the New York Post story right after it dropped yesterday morning. I immediately reached out to the Biden campaign to see if they had any answer. I wish I'd given the story a closer read before tweeting it. Twitter suspended me. So you actually have a reporter reporting on a story, asking the other side for comment. And Twitter says, "Hi, Jake Sherman, your account at Jake Sherman has been locked for violating Twitter rules." Now, what did the Politico reporter do? Immediately tweets after that, "My goal was not to spread information." Well, that's a little worrisome just in and of itself. "My goal was to raise questions about the story. Oh, my overlords in Silicon Valley, I was attacking the New York Post. You don't understand. I was attacking them," as I did in subsequent tweets, and see how the Biden campaign was going to respond. They later did respond. And then, not long after, Jake Sherman comes back with, "My account is clearly no longer suspended. I deleted the tweet." When Twitter is editing and censoring and silencing the New York Post, the newspaper with the fourth highest circulation in the country, and Politico, one of the leading newspapers in the country, is Twitter behaving as a publisher when it's deciding what stories reporters are allowed to write and publish and what stories they're not?
No, and that account was not suspended. It fell afoul of the hacked materials policy. We realized that there was an error in that policy and the enforcement.
Hold on. I'm literally looking at the tweet from Twitter that says your account has been locked. You're telling me that this is not an accurate...
That's a lock and can be unlocked when you delete the...
And just to, I don't like to cut him off in the middle of his answer. I try to cut it after they give their answers, but he's about to do what liberals love to do. And it's always using language in an imprecise and malleable, semantical kind of way, right? Because the issue here is that there was a reporter who asked a question about the Hunter Biden situation, and they blocked him for it. They locked his account. Senator Cruz read the locked report, and of course I will include this in the description so you can kind of go back at your leisure and watch it for yourself. But he's like, "Well, no, we didn't suspend him. We just locked his account." Okay, but the point is you disabled his ability to access his account. See, that's the game. It's like, well, we didn't suspend him. We locked him, and we can unlock him, just like you can unsuspend him. So let's not play the word games. But that's part of their avoidance strategy, is to kind of change the language and divert the conversation into one about the language used, not necessarily the points being expressed.
I understand that you have the star chamber power. Your answer is always, well, once we silence you, we can choose to allow you to speak. But you are engaged in publishing decisions. Let me shift to a different topic. Mr. Dorsey, does voter fraud exist?
I don't know for certain.
Are you an expert in voter fraud?
No, I'm not.
Well, why then is Twitter right now putting purported warnings on virtually any statement about voter fraud?
We're simply linking to a broader conversation so that people have more information.
No, you're not. You put up a page that says, quote, "Voter fraud of any kind is exceedingly rare in the United States." That's not linking to a broader conversation. That's taking a disputed policy position. And you're a publisher when you're doing that. You're entitled to take a policy position, but you don't get to pretend you're not a publisher and get a special benefit under Section 230 as a result.
That link is pointing to a broader conversation with tweets from publishers and people all around the country.
Mr. Dorsey, would the following statement violate Twitter's policies? Quote, "Absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud."
I imagine that we would label it so that people can have more context in return.
How about this quote? Quote, "Third-party organizations, candidates, and political activists, voter fraud is particularly possible where, quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political party activists are involved in, quote, handling absentee ballots." Would you flag that as potentially misleading?
I don't know the specifics of how we might enforce that, but I imagine a lot of these would have a label pointing people to a bigger conversation.
Well, you're...
And if you notice, he keeps saying pointing people to a bigger conversation, pointing people to a broader conversation, giving people context about the conversation. You know, and that's another game, right? It's they enact their totalitarianism, their censorship in the name of benevolence, right? We're trying to help you. And it occurs to me that if you are trying to, as he purports to be doing, point someone to a broader conversation, well, let's say you and I are having a conversation and you're saying, hey, voter fraud exists, voter fraud is this. And I'm saying, actually, no, what he's saying is wrong. There's no broader conversation there. If I actively go and silence you so that only the point that I'm trying to express gets expressed, what broader conversation is there? That's actually the opposite of what you're trying to do. You're actually trying to narrow the conversation down to one that says voter fraud does not exist. So, excuse me. So, again, excuse me once again. But again, that's part of the game, is to kind of confuse the point. We're trying to give context for a broader conversation. We're trying to give these points some point to a broader discussion being had. It's always some kind of vague kind of, okay, where is this discussion being had? What are the points of this discussion other than voter fraud does not exist? Name me any other point of this discussion. So, just wanted to point that out. That, you know, they'll it's almost frustrating because, I mean, not frustrating for me personally because I can see through it, but it's irritating that more people can't see what the clear contradiction in what he's saying and what they're doing. Again, if I want to have a broader conversation on a subject, doesn't even have to be voting. It could be about, let's talk about football, the best football team of all time, the best football franchise of all time. And I say, well, it's the Dallas Cowboys, because it is. And someone else says, no, it's the San Francisco 49ers. And I say, you can't talk anymore. And another person says, well, it's Philadelphia Eagles. I say, no, you really can't talk. And eventually everybody who says something other than the Cowboys, I say, no, you can't talk. Well, then what is the only discussion that can be had? That the Cowboys are the best. So how is that a broader conversation? As opposed to me saying the Cowboys, someone else saying, it's the Patriots. And then we actually debate that. And then I have to expound on why I think the Cowboys are the best. And then he has to expound on why he thinks the Patriots are the best. And then another person says, it's the Chargers. And then we both laugh at him. But then we say, okay, expound. And then he expounds on that. That's a broader discussion. And the thing about broader discussions is they express more than one point of view. They almost have to, because again, otherwise there's no discussion to be had if we feel the same way.
Right, you would label them because you've taken the political position right now that voter fraud doesn't exist. I would note both of those quotes come from the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform. That is Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker. And Twitter's position is essentially voter fraud does not exist. Are you aware that just 2 weeks ago in the state of Texas, a woman was charged with 134 counts of election fraud? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
If I tweeted that statement with a link to the indictment, would you put a wording on it that says, well, the Democratic Party position right now is voter fraud doesn't exist?
I don't think it's useful to get into hypotheticals, but I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? Well, we're going to test that because I'm going to tweet that and we'll see what you put on it. All right. Yesterday, Mr. Dorsey, you and I spent a considerable amount of time on the phone, and you said that you wanted to embrace transparency. So I want to ask you, I have asked Twitter, I've asked Facebook multiple times, how many times have you blocked Republican candidates for office, their tweets or their posts in 2016 and 2018 and 2020? How many times have you blocked Democratic candidates for office? How many times have you blocked Republican office holders? How many times have you blocked Democratic office holders? Twitter has repeatedly refused to answer that question with specific hard data and cataloging the examples. In the interest of transparency, which you said you want to embrace, will you commit in this hearing right now to answer those questions in writing?
That's exactly what we want to do.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dorsey, I didn't hear you.
That's exactly what we're pushing for as we think about building upon 230.
Is that a yes that you will answer those questions in writing?
Transparency, not just of outcomes, but also our process as well.
Is that a yes that you will answer those questions in writing?
We'll certainly look into it and see what we can do.
And actually answer them.
And there it is. We'll look into it and see what we can do. That means no. But at the same time, again, like Senator Cruz said, OG Ted, the hardest working Republican in Congress, he said, well, we talked yesterday and you said you wanted transparency. So, okay, if you want transparency, then unless he's not familiar with what that word means. I mean, earlier he did use the word publishing to define what a publisher is. So maybe he doesn't understand how definitions work. But if you want transparency, then why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you provide him with everything he's asking for? Kind of like this election, right? If Joe Biden won clean, then why don't you want to recanvass all of these ballots? Why don't you actually want to actually qualify all of these ballots? Because obviously you have something to hide. So that was the discussion between Senator Cruz and Jack Dorsey of Twitter. And now, really quickly, I know I'm going to go over what I like to do in my half hour. I'm already over it, but yeah, you don't mind. But this one's actually a little bit quicker. This is Senator Hawley of Missouri, I believe, and he is actually talking to Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. And one of the interesting things about this is, well, you'll see. There's some things that get exposed in this that
corporations in America,
people may not know a thing about.
Together and they set rates, they set prices, they determined how they would control information flow, they determined how they get rid of competition. And I'll be darned if we aren't right back there again. Except for this time, you're the robber barons. Your companies are the most powerful companies in the world, and I want to talk about how you're coordinating together to control information. In recent days, my office was contacted by a Facebook whistleblower, a former employee of the company with direct knowledge of the company's content moderation practices, and I want to start by talking about an internal platform called Tasks that Facebook uses to coordinate projects, including censorship. The Tasks platform allows Facebook employees to communicate about projects they're working on together. That includes Facebook's censorship teams, including the so-called community well-being team, the integrity team, and the hate speech engineering team, who all use the Task platform to discuss which individuals or hashtags.
Hate speech engineering team. And I guarantee you that there's some kind of major in some kind of university that's associated with this. You have 3 different teams dedicated to censoring people. Community wellness, community well-being. And they all have some kind of benevolent name, right? Except hate speech engineering. That actually sounds like a focus group that comes up with racial slurs. But you have 3 different groups dedicated to censoring people and seeking out people to censor. I don't understand how you can put a positive spin on that. But okay, let's continue.
Or websites to ban. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, you're familiar with the Task platform, aren't you?
Senator, we use the task system for, I think it's, as you say, for people coordinating all kinds of work across the company, although I'm not sure if I'd agree with the characterization specifically around content moderation that you gave.
Well, let's get into that. And let me see if we can refresh your memory and provide folks at home watching with an example. Here over my shoulder is an example. It's a screenshot of the Task platform in use. You'll notice if the cameras zoom in, several references to election integrity throughout on these lists of tasks. Again, this is shared across Facebook's sites, company locations by working groups. What particularly intrigued me is that the platform reflects censorship input from Google and Twitter as well. So Facebook, as I understand it, Facebook censorship teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter and Google and then enter those companies' suggestions for censorship onto the task platform so that Facebook can then follow up with them and effectively coordinate their censorship efforts. Mr. Zuckerberg, let me just ask you directly, under oath now, does Facebook coordinate its content moderation policies or efforts in any way with Google or Twitter?
Senator, let me be clear about this. We do coordinate on and share signals on security-related topics. So, for example, if there is signal around a terrorist attack, or
Again, a yes or no question that we're getting a word salad for. But what did he lead off with? I want to be clear about this. Okay, well, if you want to be clear about a yes or no question, then the first word out of your mouth is either yes or no. And then if you choose to, add to that point, that's perfectly fine. But when you don't answer a yes or no question with a yes or a no, obviously you're not trying to be clear. But again, clarity is not the name of the game here. It's about confusing the point and then diverting the conversation to something else.
or around child exploitation imagery, or around a foreign government creating an influence operation, that is an area where the companies do share signals about what they see. But I think it's important to be very clear that that is distinct from the content moderation policies that we or the other companies have, where once we share intelligence or signals between the companies, each company makes its own assessment of the right way to address and deal with that information.
Well, I'm talking about content moderation. I'm talking about individuals, websites, hashtags, phrases to ban. Is it your testimony that you do not communicate with Twitter or Google about content moderation, about individuals, websites, phrases, hashtags to ban? Just yes or no. Do you communicate with Twitter or Google about coordinating your policies in this way?
Senator, we do not coordinate our policies.
Do your Facebook content moderation teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter or Google?
Senator, I'm not aware of anything specific, but I think it would be probably pretty normal for people to talk to their peers and colleagues in the industry.
It would be normal, but you don't do it?
No, I'm saying that I'm not aware of any particular conversation, but I would expect that some level of communication probably happens. But that is different from coordinating what our policies are or our responses in specific instances.
Well, fortunately, I understand that the task platform is searchable. So will you provide a list of every mention of Google or Twitter from the tasks platform to this committee?
Senator, that's something that I can follow up with you and your team after on.
Well, yes or no, I'm sure you can follow up with the list, but why don't you commit while I've got you here under oath? It's so much better to do this under oath. Will you commit now to providing a list from the tasks platform of every mention of Google or Twitter?
Senator, respectfully, I'm without having looked into this, I'm not aware of any sensitivity that might exist around that, so I don't think it would be wise for me to commit to that right now, but I would be happy to follow.
How many items on the task platform reflect that Facebook, Twitter, and Google are sharing information about websites or hashtags or platforms that they want to suppress?
Senator, I do not know.
Will you provide a list of every website and hashtag that Facebook content moderation teams have discussed banning on the task platform?
Senator, again, I would be happy to follow up with you or your team to discuss further how we might move forward on that. But without
will you commit to it here? Senator Cruz and Senator Lee both asked you for lists of individuals, websites, entities that have been subject to content moderation. You expressed doubt about whether any such information exists, but you've also now said that the task website, you've acknowledged the task platform exists, that it is searchable. So will you commit to providing the information you have logged on the task website about content moderation that your company has undertaken? Yes or no?
Senator, I think it would be better to follow up once I've had a chance to discuss with my team what any sensitivity around that would be that might prevent the kind of sharing that you're talking about. But once I've done that, I would be happy to follow up.
All right. So you won't commit to do it here. We could, of course, subpoena this information, but I'd much rather get it from you voluntarily. But I think let everybody take note that Mr. Zuckerberg has now repeatedly refused to provide information that he knows that he has and has now acknowledged that he has, that Tasks has under oath. Let me switch to a different topic. Mr. Zuckerberg, tell me about Sintra.
Okay. And once again, unfortunately for Mark Zuckerberg, he was nowhere near as smooth as Jack Dorsey. But again, I'll put the links to this in the description. You can kind of see how he's kind of stammering and a little flustered, trying to find his words. But once again, we want to provide clarity, but you don't want to give what's being asked for. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up because we've kind of gone over here a little bit, but I wanted you to hear just those two clips. And again, the whole thing is about 4 hours long. I'll throw the link for that down there too. You can kind of pick through it at your leisure. But it's very interesting, especially Sintra and what Sintra does. I would highly encourage that you look into that because that is alarming. I am not on Facebook any longer because for reasons along these lines. I don't like the accessibility. I don't like how invasive it is. It's not a good thing. And when people are kind of talking about social media and all this other stuff, a lot of people say, okay, well, Parler's the answer. And a lot of people have gone to Parler. I am on Parler. Parler is basically the Pepsi to Twitter's Coke. It's pretty much the same thing, just a different brand. And why people have gone there is because they are less restrictive in their guidelines. They actually do it in a kind of like a peer review system. So it's other people who use the website that kind of determine that. Ultimately, I don't think that's an answer because once upon a time, Facebook was like that. But when the money started to flow in, well, then things change. And there's nothing to say the same thing won't happen with Parler. Additionally, there's nothing to say that if the man that owns Parler, I can't think of his name right now, if he doesn't acquiesce and end up doing what Zuckerberg has done, what Dorsey has done, there's nothing to say that they just won't destroy Parler. Because again, you're dealing with this little unholy alliance here between Twitter, Google, and Facebook. You're dealing with three companies that are arguably more powerful than any government that's ever existed. Certainly as affluent, if not more. So we'll see what comes of this. I think the best thing that can happen is the 230 provisions be stripped from all of these platforms, since they have already made it their business to perform as a publisher by censoring certain people. Anyway, that is what I have for you all today. I will, again, leave all of these links in the description box. I appreciate you guys for hanging in there and listening. We went a little long today. Whew. 43 minutes. Whew. All right. Well, anyway, I will get up with you guys again tomorrow. I hope this has been informative for you. And until then, peace.